Welcome to Geek Gab Game Night. This is a Geek Gab special focused on tabletop gaming. I'm your host, Dornall. Tonight, I've got the regular Geek Gab hosts with me tonight. Daddy Warpig.
Oh, is this again? Is this where I'm supposed to say something?
I was hoping you'd say hello to everybody out there.
Oh, hi everybody out there. I'm Daddy Warpig.
Yes, blogger extraordinaire, veteran game master. It's great to have you as usual. Also, Brian Niemeyer, author and game master. Say hi, Brian.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. Glad to have joined you. I almost didn't, but we had a slight scheduling change, so I think it's working out.
Great. Well, thanks for joining me, guys. We originally had a special guest, Rick Stump, joining us tonight. However, as is usual on a Geek Gab production, technical difficulties have prevented him from even using his computer.
But new and entertainingly different technical difficulties. That's what's important, folks. It's not just that Geek Gab brings you technical difficulties. We bring you brand new, heretofore unthought of technical difficulties that the show has never done before. We don't repeat ourselves twice. Tonight's technical difficulties is a power outage at his house that turned off his internet. So,
oh, that's horrible. And speak of the devil, I see that Rick Stump has joined us.
Hey guys, one of those nights. We're using my hotspot that I normally use for sales calls, but here I am.
That's fantastic. I wish I had waited 30 seconds because I had just explained that you weren't able to join us. This is wonderful.
No. Not just that you weren't able to join us. He was also chuckling at your misfortune.
Well, that's fair. That's more than fair.
For those of you who don't know me, I do that to everybody. I chuckle at every misfortune I can.
Well, better than crying about it.
In fact, in high school, I chose to learn German because of the word Schadenfreude. Well, allow me to finish introducing you. You were on the show, on the regular Geek Gab show a couple of weeks ago. You've been gaming for many, many years, and our conversation was so great and interesting, we just had to create a spin-off RPG show just to talk to you some more. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's very kind.
And what's the name of that spin-off podcast there?
I'm calling it the Geek Gab Game Night.
Cool.
Very nice. Very
I
nice.
want to say this. Schadenfreude is a great word, but it is not the best German word I've ever heard of.
Do tell.
Backpfeifengeschichte. It is literally means face that should be slapped, but the American translation is punchable face. It's someone with a face that is just so smug or obnoxious or whatever that you just feel the urge to punch them.
Oh my goodness. I'm going to send you a link after the show, not gaming related. I've got a whole thread of punchable faces. How was that again?
Backpfeifengeschichte.
Oh, if that's face, I think it's Gesicht.
Gesicht? That's probably
Gesicht.
right. Yeah. Actually,
Right. I've got a favorite German word too. I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, but it's Fremdscham. The embarrassment felt on behalf of someone else who doesn't realize that what they're doing is embarrassing.
Yes.
That's a cornerstone of modern comedy.
Yeah, that's the entire shtick of The Office, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's it.
All right. So, what I brought y'all back here for, actually, first of all, I'd like to ask you, should I call you Mr. Stump?
Well, actually, normally in this situation, just call me Rick, but I do want to point out, for anyone who hasn't heard the joke before, I grew up as Dick Stump.
I'm so sorry.
Right? Well, it gets better. My father and I have the same name. He's in an older generation. He's a World War II vet. So when he was growing up, of course, Dick was just a name. It was just a nickname for Richard. So since I'm from a very small town in Indiana, until I was 12 and asked him to stop, I was Little Dicky.
That's wonderful.
So I was Little Dicky Stump until I turned 13, yes.
I'm going to stick to Rick. How about that?
Rick's fine. Rick's fine.
So our last episode, we were going to have you bounce off of Jeffro Johnson of Appendix N, talking about OSR. So before we get into tonight's topic, I'd like to hear your thoughts on OSR, what it means, and what it means to you in your games.
Well, certainly. It's interesting. I came to OSR Online kind of late, only about 2014, 2015, well after it was underway, and had been doing very good for a long time.
That's even.
I didn't do. I had a lot of young kids, so I didn't spend a lot of time online about gaming. So I've been thinking about this a lot as somebody who's been playing D&D for 40 years, but only started talking about OSR a few years ago. And I think what it boils down to, in my opinion, the OSR is a system where you are making your own version for your own table continuously. Doesn't mean there's no rules. Doesn't mean there's not enough shared rules for other people to sit down at your table and play. Somebody else that knows BX or AD&D First Edition, whatever, can sit down and fit in fairly seamlessly. But it's your own thing that you're sharing with your party. And that's the way I look at it.
See, that's a really unique take on the whole thing, and I love it because I don't know if you heard last episode, but I talked a lot about my experiences growing up. And my gaming days were the heyday of splat books, second edition splat books, and White Wolf. And so to me and my friends, when we were learning to play, that game that we were sharing that you're talking about, it was more about the setting and the narrative and the characters and everything like that.
Exactly right. I mean, I don't want to call it collaborative storytelling because role-playing gaming is not storytelling. It's not. But there is a collaboration going on there. The way I think of it is, rule 0, the DM is always right, combined with the fact that the earliest games were more of a framework of essential rules, I think, combined where over time you'd come up to a situation where you had to make a ruling, and to be consistent over time, that turned into a rule for you and your table. And since I often played with multiple groups, I would have slightly different rules for slightly different groups because we'd had different adjudications. And I think that just colors my opinion there. And again, sometimes I have guys from my Wednesday night game play on my Saturday night game, and they could fit right in, even though the initiative rules were slightly different, or we did find traps slightly differently. So I think that just colors my perspective. But absolutely, you can see a lot of the splat books, I think, were an attempt to overcome that, to say, well, rather than having you make a ruling, let's make a ruling for you. And I think that while that may have been a moneymaker, I think it was in the end a mistake.
All right. You're probably right. Although, I mean, for a few years, that White Wolf made a lot of money on a lot of garbage.
White Wolf made a lot of money, but they look at what happened. They ended up having to reboot their entire system because as it grew, you ran into a situation where they started to contradict themselves. And that's fine. I mean, let's reboot. Everybody reboots every now and then. But when you're a system and you've got upwards of 40 books and you have to go back and edit them all to make them work, that's pretty serious. And you're expecting a lot of cash investment from your players. I don't know how fair that is. On the other hand, let's look at Osric, right? How much is Osric? It's a complete system. It's a very comprehensive system. It's free. If you want to come up with your own set of rules for your own table, it's free. If you want to share it on RPG Now, Drive Through RPG, Lulu, whatever, you can do it for everywhere from free up to $20 or $30. People can share it. And if something you don't like about it, well, you pencil it in. You move on. You don't have this massive reboot. And second edition was a great system, right? Second edition is a very robust system. We have a lot of fondness for the Skills and Powers books here in this family. But again, what's the strength of Skills and Powers? You do it yourself, right? The entire Skills and Powers books are, hey, here's a bunch of guidelines so that you can set up your own rules for your own table. And because of this framework, anybody else can sit down, and if they know the rules, they can sit down and play.
Yeah, and we loved that book.
Oh, it's a great book. Matter of fact, if it was up to my wife, that's all we'd play.
Although, if I recall, back when we were power gaming, we just used whatever rules were convenient to cheese whatever encounter we were in.
Yes, absolutely.
We had an extremely lenient GM. It was very fun.
Well, I think that one of the problems that you sometimes see, and I think it's one of the reasons that some people came up with splat books and stuck to rules, were if you have a powerful personality at the table, a player can actually railroad a game master. If the game master is young or inexperienced or unsure themselves, a charismatic player can pretty much take over the game. And I think that led to some of the rules lawyering from the DM side that you still see to this day.
Well, you're absolutely right, because this is why we only let Daddy Warpig run the games. Either of you guys want to jump in on what Rick had to say about that? Oh,
I think so.
Go ahead.
I wasn't a big fan of second edition. Not that it was bad, but that was the point at which there are fundamental decisions that were made in D&D that have made it a very robust game that is easily picked up for people to play. I'm talking not second edition now, mind you. I'm talking about earlier editions of D&D.
Oh, D&D, BX, AD&D 1, sure.
Yeah, all that. BECMI. When those decisions are over-elaborated on, it produces a system that is both fragile and highly complex. And I'm not a big fan necessarily of a lot of those fundamental decisions. Now, there's a difference between, I mean, we're on the internet, right? And the number one moral code on the internet is, if I personally don't like it, it must therefore be garbage. It's absolute garbage. If I personally don't like it, and anyone who likes it is a bad and stupid human being who should be sterilized to protect the human race from them ever reproducing. Now, I feel kind of strange when I go on the internet and talk to people, because I'm constantly making comments that befuddle them. Things like, I didn't really like a lot of the decisions that go into making up D&D. However, that the mechanics that they chose are very robust and have lasted for a long time for a good reason. There's good reasons why those mechanics work. They're just not particularly to my taste. I realize this alienates me from, like, all but the tiniest fraction of internet users, but that's the way I feel about it.
Well, let's just say that we're not going to invalidate your feelings. Anybody?
No, we're just going to let that.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. There's a whole lot of stop liking what I don't like, and that's always been true in the gaming community. Holy simoleons! I mean, I think that's a cornerstone. You get right down to it, there's no such thing as edition wars. Not really. It's just people screaming, "Stop liking what I don't like," and that can be over a splat book. But yeah, I ran into somebody recently. There was I think Jeffro talks about it. I think maybe you talked about it. An article, somebody saying, "Well, I love D&D, but I hate Gigaz and his legacy." And you'll see this sometimes every now and then. Oh, well, Gigaz was a terrible game designer. Well, his stuff's been in print almost half a century. It's still wildly popular today. It's the basis for 50% of the freaking computer games that we play that are role-playing at all. I don't care what your personal opinion of it is. It's doing quite well. And has been doing quite well for 50 years, So
Gary Gygax was a bad game designer. I don't think Gary Gygax wasn't primarily involved in. He wasn't deliberately designing a game. I'll get back to that in just a second.
Yeah, it was sort of happened to him. Yeah, I think that's what makes it so robust.
But he was really, really awful at presenting a system, at giving a systematized presentation of the rules, and at the same time completely failed to communicate the core gameplay, the intended gameplay of D&D. people who picked up D&D who never learned it from someone who learned it from someone who learned it from Gygax had no idea how the rules were intended to work together, and so they played it in a completely different manner. And a lot of the people complaining about D&D saying, well, we have to remove this, or we want to add intelligence scores for wizards, so you have to be smart to learn wizard spells, and we want to remove this rule because it's kind of annoying in play. All of those objections come about because people who came into the game later, who weren't part of the Lake Geneva crowd or friends of the Lake Geneva crowd, didn't really know how D&D was originally intended to be played.
You know, I hate to be. I've heard many other people talk about this, and it's going to prompt me to go into a personal anecdote. So everyone, buckle in, because I can get wordy when I'm doing personal anecdote time. I run into people, and you're certainly not alone that say that to me. I suspect it's almost the majority of people I talk to online say the same thing. And I also run into a majority of people saying, well, you know, I felt like an outcast, and I got picked on for playing D&D, and maybe it's just me, but I find that completely different from my personal experience. And I'm not saying it's not true. It's just that, you know, I ran into a D&D at the age of 9 and played 3 times with some college kids who picked up the books on their own. And then basically it was me and my friends on our own then. And I run into a lot of other sort of petri dish guys where the books have been dropped in their laps for Christmas or something and have learned it. And in general, the people I have run into seem to understand very well how to play. My table always had football players and girls at it. I can only remember 2 or 3 sessions growing up where I didn't have women at the table, girls or women at the table, sometimes adults. So, I mean, I have to accept that the vast majority of people seem to share that experience that you have of it wasn't presented very well. People didn't understand how to play it, but it's so alien to me. All I can really say is that's never been my experience.
Here's one tiny example. One of the rules that turns out to be key in retrospect, once I've learned about it from somebody in the OSR. A friend of mine is actually working with Gary Gygax's son, making a mega dungeon,
Sure.
clued me into this. You have the weapon versus armor tables, which is X weapon versus Y armor type gives you a modifier. I'm talking first edition AD&D now.
Oh, yeah. Like page 35. I can see the page in my head, sure.
And that's a really cumbersome rule for a lot of reasons, and it's one of the rules people just tend to throw away and don't even think about. Here's the thing, though. One of the core purposes or one of the core competencies of monks is completely destroyed if you throw away that table, because monks get massive bonuses against unarmored people, okay? So monks are highly mobile, they can move through the battlefield very easily, and they get massive bonuses against people who aren't wearing armor. Now, put those 2 facts together, and what does that suggest about the role of a monk? I'll wait for my other 2 people who don't know it to come up with something.
Take out mages.
Yep.
I've got an entire blog article about that, one of the most popular ever. And that's what monks are for. Monks are mage and cleric killers. And again, you pointed that out. If you don't look at the modifiers of weapons versus armor chart, which takes up an entire page, folks, an entire page, suddenly broadswords suck, right? If you use the chart, pole arms and broadswords are excellent choices, right? So, yeah, and I'll admit there's a lot of stuff in there. I actually, I talked about it on one of my blogs about Chesterton's fence and how important that is when you start taking out rules and throwing rules away. You guys know the parable of Chesterton's fence? Anybody?
Very well.
Yeah. And the idea is 2 guys are walking down the street. They run into a fence. One guy says, well, let's tear this fence down. It's in my way. And the other guy says, whoa, whoa, whoa. You don't know what it's for. You take that fence out, you could let a wild bull loose and it could kill children. Let's figure out what this is for, then we'll change it. And yeah, monks or wizards. Well, I talk a lot about what I call the roles, the 4 roles. Physical offense, magical and physical defense, and then scouting and intelligence, right? And Those are the big 4 classes: fighters, magic users, clerics, and thieves. And monks are the oddball, because what monks do are eliminate magical offense and magical defense. That's what they do. You can't charm them. You can't hold them. They're super fast. They can kill magic users in one blow. They can keep clerics so busy they can't cast. It's, you know, amazing stuff. But you know, you put it out there, and a lot of people ditch that rule. And another thing is that I find is a lot of people misunderstand a key element too. The front pages, they've never checked for parasites or disease from the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Parasites and
now
disease.
That sounds parasites and disease, right? You get a parasites and disease chart, etc. You start looking at the back of the Dungeon Master's Guide with all the dungeon dressings and random dungeon design, the stuff to put in the dungeon. You start looking at stuff like Lost City, some of these modules, even though that's a basic module, not a first edition module. You look at some of the modules and where they're set, how they're set, and you look at that and you realize a shocking number of these dungeons are a lot harder if you just follow the rules and start checking for disease and parasites. Well, one of the examples I had was that plus encumbrance. My kids decided to start up. They want to play first edition, so I put them in Search the Unknown, and they went in, and the party we almost got a total party kill because they didn't take enough food and water, and the monk got a skin rash. Right? Wow. And I can hear people listening going, well, why would I do that? Why in the world would I do the disease and parasites? Well, because historically, that's what killed half of all the soldiers who ever died. Because it makes it interesting. Are you guys going to go into the swamps after so-and-so? They better plan ahead. You better have a cleric along. You better do this, that, and the other. It actually makes a lot of things a lot more critical. It makes the encumbrance more critical. Because you have to have dry clothes. You have to have the ability to cook your food. You know. And we're getting a little afield here, but yeah, when you look at the whole system, and I have to admit, you know, Jeff, Daddy, a lot of people, you know, sort of skip these rules, but old school D&D can be shockingly heavy resource management game.
And
about getting to and from.
And they changed that with future editions. They changed the nature of that resource game. Where
absolutely.
They made resource generating spells available at earlier levels, that sort of thing, and completely removing stuff like that from later editions. Anything related to diseases or anything, that would be module specific. There'd be nothing in the Dungeon Master's Guide about that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Or maybe just a paragraph.
Think about the depth that adds to your campaign, though. I mean, let's go crazy here. You take a look at this, and this is a real life example. Let me cast my mind back to I'm 11 years old. It's 1979, around Christmas time. I've been running my Seaward campaign for about 4 months, and my friend George failed his disease check, and he got a nasty one. You know, chronic, lethal brain disease. So the spot talked about the yellow fever. You got the yellow cough. Yellow cough. Just came up on the fly, wrote it down, and within 6 weeks, it was a major plot point. And now it's built into the campaign about, you know, well, so-and-so's got a cough, and he's got a high fever, and his mucus is flowing, well, he's got the yellow cough, he's got the yellow fever, we have to go get a sage and get the cure. And it's driven a lot of plots of a lot of the years. As a matter of fact, I think Lou Pulsifer might very well remember that the very first adventure I ran for him was to seek out this sage in the mountains who had a medicine that could keep you from getting yellow cough, you know. But these little things mean a lot, you know. Bags of holding only matter if you track encumbrance.
I want to add a modification to what I observed. One of the things about early D&D modules that they did well was that not all of them, but a lot of them were successfully, and Jeff was the one who pointed this out to me. They were built not just as things people could play through, but built to show dungeon masters themselves how they could build their own dungeons in a similar fashion. So if you came into D&D where your first modules were those old classic modules, and And so what I'm trying to say is the way Gary Gygax wrote the game is you can't take the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook and the Monster Manual and just know how to play D&D. You also have to take into account, Keep on the Borderlands or the Caves of Chaos or, all of those other really, really classic modules because they show you what D&D is supposed to be. But now if you fast forward to, let's say, BECMI, where you have the Grand Duchy of Karamikos and all of the modules that came out with that, a lot of which are really, really good modules, like the Island of Dread that came out with the Expert set.
Oh, great module, yeah.
But many of them, or most of them, or nearly all of them, don't communicate that same classic variety of dungeon crawls as the earliest TSR modules. And so people who came in at that point never really picked up on the core of dungeon play. So it may just be a matter of 3 or 4 years or 5 or 6 years of age difference in when you picked up AD&D or D&D, and the modules you picked up made all the difference because the core gameplay wasn't explicit in the rule books, it was implicit in the modules.
I'd like to follow up more in line with with today's topic. You made me think of something, Rick, that sort of has bothered me in my weekly games, which is there's a lot of different options of things to do, and there's lots of different checks that you could make and add to sort of your I want to say day-to-day routine or turn-to-turn routine.
Right.
So what I want to know is, how do you prepare for a campaign, or how do you prepare for a session with all of that stuff in mind?
Well, if you want to, okay, I'll tell you how I prepare. I've got 2 campaigns I'm running right now. Seaward, which I started in 1979, which is still running, and Blackstone, which is 2nd edition Skills and Powers. Seaward, as you can imagine, I'm in my office right now, so I've got about 30,000 pages handwritten on Seaward in here that's not in primary rotation. I've got about 50 or 60 gigs total, maps and stuff. Anyway, it's big, it's huge, it's sprawling. I do believe that I've got too much going on. But when I sit down for that one with the crew, if I'm doing something big, like they're going into Skull Mountain or something, I go through my NPC box. I've got a file box with 3x5 cards. I check and see if there's any interactions with NPC owed to or from any of the characters. And then I go through and I calculate the weather for a week or 2 using my weather charts. So I know what the weather's like, even if they're going to be underground. I check for random encounters before, so I've got a stack of random encounters appropriate to the terrain and the weather and the time of year. I look for things like festivals, religious festivals, sky conjunctions, planetary alignments, anything like that that might be important. Note all that stuff. I go down, if the adventure's already written, I write the adventure. I try to tie it in if possible, if I'm with something else that's going on. And then I consolidate that all in about 4 or 5 pages, take out one of my temporary maps for the region of the kingdom that's going on, put my notes on the map where things are going to happen, what's going to go on. Talk to all the players, let them know the level of the rough level I think they should have. If they've got any hints or rumors of what's going on, let them pick who they're going to play. And then after they tell me that, I pass around a sheet that we have. They fill out all their character information on the sheet, so I have it, armor class, saving throw bonuses, etc., handy. And then I calculate any treasure, make any unique treasure items I might want to put in that time. Update any NPC cards that are going on, and then we move forward. It sounds like a lot. It usually takes about an hour and a half.
And that's for how much time of gaming do you get out of that hour and a half of prep?
It depends. Usually 4 to 6 hours minimum. Sometimes longer. And I cheat. Like if they're going into Skull Mountain, I've been working on that for years. If they're doing something new, yeah, we get 4 to 6 hours easy out of a session like that. As a matter of fact, I should take that back. It's more than that. 6 to 9 hours. 6 to 9 hours. Now, on the other hand, sometimes we'll do what we call pickup, and this is what I do for a pickup. hey, we want to go on an adventure. We got some time. We weren't planning it. I grab the my encounter charts. I roll 3 encounters. I figure out how to make at least 2 of them into an adventure. Write that down, and we start in 20 minutes. So run the whole gamut. But yeah, when I'm doing a preparation for an adventure, it takes me about an hour and a half. But when I'm done, I've got everything from random encounters to the weather, and even what phases of the moon and the tide's going to look like, because I worked that out on charts a long time ago.
So this presupposes a ton of prior setup that you've built on. You've built on
Sure.
years and years of gaming.
Well, I actually wrote about this not too long ago. I've got when I did Blackstone, I did it whole cloth. This took me about it took me about 16 days to do this. We wanted to start a new campaign. My kids were old enough that they could all start a campaign. So this is about 9-10 years ago. Talked to the wife, sat down, and I made it. I started off with a preface of history from the late Paleolithic up to the current day. Came up with a dynastic periods, came up with a calendar, a world map, tides, major trade routes, major catastrophic events, timeline of magic development, that whole thing. Drew political boundaries, came up with unique coinage, created the names for 14 languages, actually worked out 20 to 50 words in 4 artificial languages, including basic syntax. Made about 200 NPCs, at least brief notes. Some of them were very fleshed out. Did 4 regional maps, did the maps of 3 castles and 2 villages. Came up with a detailed backstory of the local villages and cities, on and on and on. I'm skipping a lot. And I did that all in about 2 weeks in order to get ready for what I knew was going to be a decade of gaming. That's over the top. I'm going to flat out say that's over the top. Most of that is because I enjoy doing that. I still have 150 of those NPCs I've never used, and it's been 9 years. So you can do a lot to prepare. Now, having that all done makes it really easy when somebody says, hey, what time of year is it? Oh, it's cold even. I'm just, excuse me, it's frost flowers right now. It's snowing. The weather's about 40 degrees, and you can see the pommel star rising in the east. So it must be almost midnight. That's easy. Now, you can do that off the top of your head and just write it down. You can simply say, oh, it's cold. That doesn't matter. But that detail, it seeps out. It comes out when you're talking to your players. It makes it a little more facile to do, but it's not everyone's cup of tea. When I first started Seaward, I had a piece of paper torn out of a notebook. I used a pencil, put a coastline in, put an X where the pirates were, and put a circle where the village was. And that was fine for a year, Yeah, so you can go either way. But yeah, my preparation is pretty over the top, including con languages and sky charts.
I'll say.
I think I may have OCD. I'm not really sure.
Well, I mean, that sounds like a great framework for someone who has long weekend session games in their own world that they built.
Well, yeah, I am lucky right now, especially when we do we do gaming. I sort of have a captive audience for my party. I got a party of 5 very consistent players. My 4 oldest sons and my wife. It's a very popular hobby, so we play 2 or 3 times a month. This is nowhere near the most I've ever played. And they're committed to the campaign, and they have a very deep understanding of the rules. As a matter of fact, I'm at the point now where my 14-year-old is so conversant with the rules. When we want to know what's going on, we just ask him. And that's compared to me, who's been reading them for 40 years. So I kind of have an edge that way. Now my children have all done their own campaigning in D&D and other systems. And they run the gamut from, well, here's a town and there's a desert, let's go, up to my 3rd son probably put in 3 months of work before he let us do anything. So preparation is what you want to do. You don't have to do a lot of preparation. Well, you guys have heard the joke about the orc and a pie, right?
Body cook.
Yeah, exactly, Monty. An orc and a pie. There's a 10 by 10 room. Inside is an orc. He has a pie. And as he points out, that's a complete adventure. Well, I would take the next step. That's actually a complete campaign, right? That's a campaign. Where's the orc live? Where does he get the pie? Where are the fruit trees? I mean, you just start taking these steps back, and I think that if you start thinking about that in, like, starting with an orc and a pie as a campaign, it becomes really obvious what you need to make a campaign. You just have to be able to explain, where do the things the players need come from? And then everything else just falls into place.
Your level of preparation actually reminds me of what Brian was telling me. Brian has the same sort of situation with a pretty consistent group and years of history. Brian, is your prep sort of the same?
No. Originally, I did. I would stay up until the wee hours of the morning, mainly when I was back in college, and just fill notebooks with game plans, usually before campaign started. But as the years have gone on, I suppose I should amend that, because I now run almost exclusively my own homebrewed systems that me and my friends have come up with. So yeah, for the last game I ran, I did more prep than I ever have done, because I wrote like 5 rule books. But in terms of planning out the actual sessions, I'll just like write a story hook, and okay, here's some NPCs, here's what they know, here's what's in the chests, as it were, and then I'll really just pass the ball to the players and kind of react to what they do.
You've got a fortunate situation that you could react to that.
Yeah, like I've said before, I just know these guys so well that I pretty much know how their characters are going to react beforehand.
It does help.
And if they throw me a curveball, I just run with it.
I have to admit, one of the great joys of my life is I run for my own children, and they still surprise me every game.
I love hearing that. It's funny that you guys say that, because I'm in a different scenario. I don't play off the players in that same way. I'm pretty bad at sort of shooting from the hip. I run a short game, like 2 to 3 hours, every week or every other week, and it's out of a mega dungeon, and I pretty much just run with that.
Listen, the mega dungeons, that's what they're great for. And I know it sounds weird, but you get a massive mega dungeon with lots of development and stuff. Oh, we've only got 2 hours. Okay, that works.
And we've been playing for over a year, and they still haven't finished it. I'm going to have to think of something soon. So it sounds like the technical difficulties are going to rear their ugly head again.
Yeah, guys, like I said, I'm using a hotspot. I wasn't prepared for this, and I'm losing battery power. I'm going to bow out before I glitch out. I apologize profusely. I had a great time, and I look forward to talking to you guys again soon.
Thanks for coming on, Rick. Do you have 30 seconds for a quick question?
Absolutely.
Corey M. in the chat room asks, what kind of notes should a GM keep or make?
I think the most important notes are the stuff that your characters are going to remember, the players are going to remember. That way you can be consistent if they ask again.
That's a great answer, because they keep asking me, hey, did such and such happen? And I'm like, guys, I have no idea. You should have written that down.
All right. Thanks again, guys. I apologize, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for coming on, Rick.
Good night, Rick.
Go for it, guys. I want to hear your thoughts on that question, too.
Yeah, I agree with Rick, and I'll expand on that a bit. It's very important to maintain a sense of consistency to help with the immersion of your secondary world. So, if there's a pub that you just came up with off the top of your head where the characters stop and in what adventure, you'd better note that down, because if months or even years later they come back through that same town, and one of them says, "Oh yeah, let's go back to that one pub we're at. I love their meat pies." You better be able to reproduce that convincingly.
I am so bad about writing down the notes I should that it's almost worth it to hire a stenographer to record the important points of the game session. Basically, I have a big framework for the worlds I plan that I make that's fairly detailed most of the time, but that still leaves a lot of stuff that you have to make up on the fly that you just come up with off the top of your heads. And so it's either, buy that stuff for say Forgotten Realms and then rigidly stick to it because your players are going to be expecting that, or do your own world that didn't fill all that stuff in and make up NPCs, locations, new monsters, whatever, magic items, make those up on the fly. But then you need to write that down. And that's where I always fall down is I have way too often depended on my memory rather than writing it down. And don't get me wrong, I've got a great memory, and I can run for 2 years off of stuff I remembered from 2 years ago. But now it's, 14 years later, 13 years later, and a lot of the stuff from the last D&D campaign I ran is kind of fuzzy. Some of it I still remember enough to have a discussion about it, but a lot of the great details, a lot of the cool characters I came up with, a lot of things that you come up with off the fly are just lost. You forget them; they're gone. And if you're going to use that stuff again, either in the same game or with different players, or rate it for another game, write it down. Because stuff the players need to remember, that definitely should be written down. But stuff you like, stuff you think is cool, stuff you just want to remember. Did you come up with a new spell off the top of your head or a new appearance for an old spell? Write it down, man. It will only help you remember your cool stuff 10 years from now.
So what about, and here's something I wanted to try with my game, and it never really took off. Just because, I'll explain. I tried to start a journal where I would write down things that happened during the session. And it never took off, frankly, because by the end of the night, I was thoroughly exhausted from being the game master. Have you guys used something like that in that sort of capacity?
Well, I usually take more notes during the game, chronicling what the players are doing, than beforehand. So I'm used to it, but it's not like in journal format. It's just like quick shorthand, like class notes kind of stuff.
One of the suggestions from the chat is to have a laptop or something like that to take notes on, and that's a really good suggestion.
Yeah, that's what I use.
Or if you have like a tablet, or if you're playing online, like through Roll20 or whatever, just use your own computer. Obviously, don't start typing while you're also describing the situation, but sooner or later, your players are going to start arguing about something or whatever, and then you can use that downtime for you as a GM to write quick notes. I would also suggest if you take quick notes during the game, always, always, always go back to flesh them out later to give more information than you wrote down in the heat of play, because whatever tiny little fragments of notes you wrote down during play may make perfect sense today, but by tomorrow, you're only going to halfway remember what you wrote down, and in a week, it'll be complete gibberish. You can say something like the man with the gold hat, and you know exactly what that meant. You know exactly the situation where he popped up. You know exactly who he was and what his plans were. And then tomorrow you're kind of fuzzy. You're like, did I meet him here or meet him there? And then in a week you're like, why the hell did I give someone a solid gold hat?
That's excellent advice for writers in general too, because every writer carries a little notebook or something around. And I don't know how many times I've had an idea, wrote down something just like that. Like the man with the gold hat, knowing exactly what it meant, and then like 6 months later get back to it and like, what did that mean? Who was that? Oh no. So you got to be detailed enough to be able to jog your memory, but not get too detailed, because chances are you got a limited time to write it down. You have limited space. It's a fine balance you have to work out for yourself.
Man, you guys are going to get me in trouble with Mrs. Dornell as I spend an extra hour after every session taking fresh notes. But it's a great idea to have those sort of things to build on. If you don't have that sort of Rick Stump level of just sheer volume of notes and world building to work on. Do you guys have any recommendations for any preparation tools for someone like me who doesn't have a fleshed out campaign, or someone who's just starting from zero?
I use a piece of software called Scrivener. It's a piece of writing software. It's fairly cheap. It's about $30. What Scrivener is, it's available for Windows and for the Mac. It allows you to have a large number of notes in one document that you can organize any way you wish. They're arranged hierarchically. So I just opened up a project, and you can have, on the top level, names, place names. Underneath that, some examples of different place names, and you can move your notes around and put up whatever you have. They even have there's a lot of different options depending on what you're doing with it, if you're writing a novel or if you're writing a screenplay or whatever. But I use it primarily right now for setting and game design. And I have, in one project, I might have thousands of notes, and the amount of RAM it consumes is not linearly related to the number of notes. It only opens them up as separate documents when you access that note to edit it. So it uses a lot smaller RAM. You can put 1,000 notes in it, and it'll use about the same amount of RAM as one with, 100 notes. It's just a very, very flexible program that is great for putting in little notes so that each character, each NPC has its own note, and you can arrange them in folders any way you like. Each place has its own note, and there's even icons that you can stick on them. One that looks like a picture of a person, okay, that's a character. One that, looks like a caution sign, a triangle with an exclamation point, okay, that's a threat or a danger, or maybe it means a villain in your game, or maybe it means a monster. There are a ton of these icons that exist that allow you to instantly look at one of these notes and know exactly what it is. And that makes things very, very quick. And it has a robust search engine built in, so that if you remember a name or a piece of phrasing, you can type it in and it'll show you all the notes that have that. It lets you find notes very, very quickly. It's a very robust program. I've used it for, I'm going to say, over 10 years now. As far as keeping notes and managing notes, especially huge numbers of them, it excels. And plus, you can also use it to write stuff up that you're going to, handouts you're going to give out to your players, or just background or whatever. You can use it for composition as well. It's not just for keeping notes.
That sounds incredible. I've already found the link to the homepage where you can get it, and I'll put that in our show notes for today.
Now, one of the most effective solutions that I came up with was actually really low tech. I just walked over to the drugstore in my neighborhood and picked up a little plastic Rolodex, a little cheap one for like $5, that had like little index cards on it that you could flip through, and with little alphabetical tabs. And I just used it to keep track of my NPCs. There's just enough room to write down their stats and their most relevant skills, and then on the back, where you normally put someone's address, just a little blurb about their background and relationships with other characters. I called it my Rolodex of Doom, and it served me very well.
By the way, one of the new features they just added to Scrivener is if you have either macOS or Windows version, and also have an iOS device, iPad, iPhone, or whatever, you can take notes and open up full documents on your iOS device, and it'll sync it to where you can then go home and you'll have that stuff available. So if you're playing at one place, you want to use your iDevice to keep all the notes, then you just tell it to sync. It'll sync all of that, and it'll be available for you when you get home on your on your PC, on your Mac or your IBM computer, IBM compatible computer, so that you don't have to, it'll sync those changes automatically.
That's fantastic. A similar option that's free, and I'm not just saying this because I work for Microsoft, but Microsoft OneNote. OneNote is a great productivity software that actually it's not really well known, but it's a similar sort of software where it's easy to take notes, to make various pages and subpages and things. You can paste in images and whatever else you want, and you can of course sync it to the cloud for use everywhere. And that'll even work with what do we call it now? OneDrive, Microsoft OneDrive. That's a free option. It's not as full-featured as Scrivener, sounds like, but it's got a lot of great features that, if you're familiar with Word, it's very similar to that. Also great for organizing all your documents and things. I should point out, I'm going to give credit to Roland Dobbins. He said it before I did in chat, but people listening live don't know that, except I just told them.
He's doing your job for you. Got to get on the ball.
So we are down to about the last 10 minutes. We had a great conversation with Rick Stump about all those things. We are out of questions. If anybody in the chat has any last-minute questions for the panel of experienced Dungeon Masters, give it a shot in the chat. We'll get to it.
Corey had a couple of questions early on. Let me toss these out, and we'll see if any of them are worth answering. Is it a good idea to make an entire game system from the ground up? I would like to tell you, as someone who is building their own game system from the ground up, it's a terrible idea. Run away. Let me put it this way: if you're gonna cobble together something for use at your personal game table, then run to your heart's extent. Do it to your heart's desires. It'll be great. You can do it very quickly. You can take bits and pieces from a dozen different systems, and as long as it works for you, great. Do that. If you're talking about actually really creating your own rules set that you intend to put together in a somewhat professional manner and either give away for free or try to sell, it's a terrible idea. It will take a lot of time. It will take a lot of development, and you're not going to see a lot of either financial remuneration or a lot of people pick up and enjoy your system. It's not a sane choice. Just take that as a commendation from someone who is currently designing his own game system. Sane people don't start.
And it's sort of worth pointing out from the business side, like all the success stories you've heard over the years, like there's a local guy, Mike Pondsmith, who did the Cyberpunk 2020 games, and he started with Mechton Z, I believe, our Talsorian games, and all those other game systems that sort of cropped up in the early 80s, the mid 80s. The market's saturated at this point. It's if you're looking at it as a business thing, it's not. It's so saturated at this point for a niche hobby. And don't forget, we're a niche hobby, guys.
Another question from Corey M. What do authors have to do to convert a story world to a setting for an RPG? That's not something authors should be doing. Authors should be writing more so they can make money. That's something a fan should do, or a company that wants to sell your game world as either a supplement for an existing game or as its own game in and of itself. Authors shouldn't be doing that. You have things that are going to make you more money that you can spend your time on. So if you want to talk about fans converting stuff for their own RPG, that's I don't know, depending on what we wanted to do with it, it could either be a long topic or a really short topic. It basically comes down to know the system you're going to be using well enough to be able to translate in-game descriptions into statistics, characteristics, attributes, classes, class features of whatever whatever system you're going to be using, whether it's D&D or Storyteller or GURPS. A lot of people have already published for free on the web their own conversions of stuff. So you might as well look at what they did and see if that works for you. Or like with GURPS 3rd edition, they did a million billion different conversions of stuff. There's GURPS Discworld. If you like the Discworld stories by Terry Pratchett, they've got an entire manual, 120 something pages, where they converted Discworld to 3rd edition GURPS. So, you know, if it's already done for you professionally, you don't have to recreate the wheel.
Yeah, I can confirm that as an author who has tried to convert his novels into a gaming system. Yeah, I shouldn't have done that. Hindsight's 2020. Gray asks, how do you judge if a challenge is the right difficulty if you don't have a lot of experience with GMing?
I have my favorite answer. This is one of my favorite questions, Gray. When I'm a dungeon master, and I assume you're talking about a sort of lethal challenge, like a combat encounter or something. My best combats are the ones in which I am sincerely afraid I am going to kill the whole party.
Yep.
When I have that feeling, and I've got that sort of tension, and most importantly, I'm letting the dice fall where they land. Those have made the best encounters in all my years of gaming.
I'd have to concur.
I'm scrolling through the chat right now, and those look like we've hit pretty much all the questions that we had answered earlier. So,
well, we got a couple of minutes. Let's. Todd Everhart asks the flip side. What are your thoughts about turning campaigns into books?
Don't.
Even professional authors who are great authors who did something like that. And I'm thinking, wasn't it Ursula K. Le Guin turned a role-playing session into the castle of something or other back in the 70s?
I know Steven Erikson is known for that. I don't know about Le Guin, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Let's start off with the small details. If your players created a character, then that character is copyright to them. And if you go and write a novel with their character in it, they can sue you. I'm not saying it would happen, but you want to have all your legal, all the legal rights set out beforehand, get permission, explicit permission in writing on some kind of contract from your players in order to use the characters they created in a novel. Also, if you used NPCs that other people created, that you borrowed from a movie or a TV show or a GURPS supplement or a D&D supplement or whatever, the people who created that character also have copyrights to their own characters, and you'll either want to get the rights for those, not going to happen, or disguise them enough, take them far enough away from their original source material that it's not going to cause you copyright problems. You're not going to get your ass sued off. That introduces the third problem. You're already going to have to change a ton of stuff from the campaign just to write the novel. You're going to have to condense plot lines, combine characters. You're going to be doing a whole bunch of work anyway. The resultant book will not resemble the original campaign hardly at all, except in vague, broad details. And you're going to be doing as much work as you would starting out, making an entire new setting for an entire new novel. It may just be more satisfying work to just write a new book.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys. I'm going to wrap up here. Let me try and summarize what I believe I got out of the great discussion tonight. When it comes to preparing for your games and preparing for your individual sessions, it helps to have a little bit of context of your game. And if that context comes from a book or movie or whatever, so be it. Because if you're going to build your whole campaign setting, it's going to be over years of gaming and writing. And on an individual game level, you should have some idea of what type of game you're running and have sort of a checklist of things that you need to do so that you're prepared. Whether it be wandering monster encounters or get your maps in order, make sure you know which characters are playing tonight so that you know what sort of challenges to give them. On that note, I'd like to thank everybody for listening. Thanks, Daddy Warpig and Brian Niemeyer and Mr. Rick Stump, who is no longer with us, for joining us. I'll give you guys a moment to say something real quick before we close up.
Go ahead, Brian.
listening and for all the great questions. We will see you this coming Saturday. We're doing Geek Gab, same time as normal, right?
Yes.
Geek Gab Prime.
Sure.
Okay. So we'll see you for Geek Gab. And then this next coming Wednesday, we've got another Geek Gab on the books planned with special guest Yakov Merkin, who has launched a new book. So we got that to look forward to. We'll also be talking about how to write non-human characters.
As for me, you can get all of the 3 Geek Gab podcasts now. We have 3 separate podcasts. On the books is for specifically about any kind of subject related to writers and writing and authors. And we've had 2 episodes so far. They've both been very well received. Brian has done a great job with his show. This show, Geek Gab Game Night, is John's baby, and it's all about role-playing games and game mastering and all of that fun stuff. And then, of course, Geek Gab Prime, which will stay exactly the same. I do want to remind you, though, folks, that if you have subscribed to us on YouTube, if you want to actually receive announcements in your email box as to when these are going live or when they've been scheduled or whatever, you have to super double secret subscribe. Down in the lower left-hand corner underneath the video, you'll have the little subscription button there. It may tell you that you've already subscribed. Unless you've actually clicked on the little bell icon, you haven't. So click on the bell icon and you can get all of the announcements so you would know when the shows are going live. You can come and participate in the chat and ask us questions and make comments, things like that. Also, for those of you who've never listened before, maybe, this is Geek Gab. You can find us on youtube.com/GeekGab. We are also available through the Google Play Store, through the iTunes Store, and on SoundCloud. Just do a search for Geek Gab, and you can find us in all 3 of those places. You can subscribe to the podcast to download to either your Android device or your iDevice, or through SoundCloud, a file you can, play pretty much on any device you have. I just want to say I appreciate very much John taking the reins of Geek Gab Game Night. It's very exciting. I'm grateful he invited me to be on.
Thank you for handling all the closing for me, Daddy Warpig. You are the best.
I handle all the boring business, so you can just talk about, the fun stuff.
Yeah, I love talking about the fun stuff. Guys, it's been great having you on. It's been great talking to everybody in the chat. I love gaming and talking about gaming. We're going to be back probably 2 weeks from now, same time, same place. Hope to line up a couple more gaming-related guests for you and talk about RPGs. This has been Geek Gab Game Night for Thursday, May 11, 2017. Thank you all, and good night.